This is R2D Tech and we're back again with another video today, this time about the iOS 14 beta, so stay tuned. So this year has seen one of the biggest changes to the look and feel of iOS. Apple have actually listened to a lot of the feedback from customers and they've added a lot of features that a lot of people wanted. Now, a lot of the features are copied from Android, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, so let's get into it. So the first and biggest change, in my opinion, is the inclusion of widgets. People have been asking for widgets on iOS for a very long time, and it's been on Android ever since I can remember. From what we've seen and the small number of widgets that are currently available, you can choose from a few different sizes and place the widget almost anywhere on your home screen. You can't place it in the middle of the home screen dividing apps, which is a little bit annoying, but that's kind of nitpicky. You can also use what they're calling a smart stack, which is basically a stack of widgets that will change during the day depending on what your needs are. You can also create your own stack of widgets by just dragging widgets on top of each other, which is, I think, a really nice feature, and that's also something that Android could copy. Obviously, like on Android, when you click on the widget, it will also jump straight into the app, which is really good to see. The next biggest feature that Apple have added is the app library, which is basically the app drawer from Android. And Android has had the app drawer pretty much since the very beginning, so it's a long time coming from Apple. If you swipe right to the very end of all your home screens, you'll reach the app library and you can search through and access all of your apps. With the app library comes the ability to hide different home screens with unwanted or rarely used apps. Now, having to keep a home screen with rarely used apps was probably one of the most annoying features on previous generations of iOS, so it's really good to see that Apple have addressed that as well. So let's move on to some of the productivity features that Apple have added. And firstly, we have picture-in-picture mode. So when you're viewing a video on Netflix or YouTube or whatever, if you leave the app, then the video will keep on playing in a smaller window that you can move around the screen, resize or whatever. That's been a feature on Android for quite a while now, so it's another feature that they've copied. I think picture-in-picture mode is a really useful feature if you want to do other things while you're watching a video, so yeah, I think it's really good. Next, we have calls, and on previous generations of iOS, when someone called you, the call screen would take up the entire display, which means that you couldn't do anything else while you're on the phone, which was really annoying. Now it's just a tiny pop-up at the top of the display and you can view other apps, which is really good. That's also similar to what Android has once again. Finally, we have Siri, and like calls on previous generations of iOS, Siri would take up the entire display so you couldn't interact with anything else. Whereas now Siri is just a tiny icon at the bottom of the display, and when you request something, the answer will just be a pop-up at the top of the display. Functionally, I think this is much better. However, personally, I don't like the design of the icon. I think it looks a little bit weird, and it also still obstructs the bottom of the display, which is quite annoying. They've also made some other changes to Siri, which they claim will make it a lot more useful. For example, a lot of responses come locally from your iPhone, which should be good for the speed of the reply as well as privacy. So that's also good. So let's move on to some of the smaller features that they've added. And firstly, we have app clips. Now, this has been on Android for quite a while once again. However, it wasn't really very publicized and it hasn't been that successful so far. So it will be interesting to see if Apple can make a difference. The basic idea is that when you're in a coffee shop or some other shop, you can tap a small NFC tag with your iPhone and it will download a small part of their app basically instantly, which you can use to order drinks or whatever. I imagine this could be quite useful, however, it really depends on the developers actually creating the clips for their apps, so we'll have to wait and see if it's really popular. Another interesting feature that Apple announced was the ability to unlock certain cars with your iPhone, so we'll definitely be looking out for that. Apple also made a few changes to their messaging apps, so you can now pin important contacts to the top of the app and it will show up as their Memoji, and if they text you, a small speech bubble will appear next to it, which I think is quite a nice feature. Next, we have a pretty cool feature where on some of their newer phones you can tap the Apple logo on the back to open certain apps, which I think is really nice to see. We've seen that kind of feature on some Android phones. Finally, we have the ability to change the default browser and email apps on iOS, and that has been a long requested feature for many people. It's also a rare moment where Apple is actually loosening their control and allowing you to use third-party apps more. Hopefully in future generations of iOS we will see the ability to also change other default apps, for example Maps. So once again, this has been a pretty big year for iOS in terms of features, and although a lot of them are copied from Android, I still think they're going to be really useful on iOS, and I also think that a lot of the features are done better than on Android. What's also good is that all the features coming to iOS will also be on iPadOS, and we're going to be doing a video on iPadOS specifically, so stay tuned for that. Other than that, I think the changes this year have been really good, and bear in mind that none of these features are final yet, and they could all change for the final version, which is coming in autumn. I think the last thing to mention that's really important is the support for iOS 14 will go all the way back to the iPhone 6s, which is really good. That's not something that can be said for many Android phones. That's it from this video. If you liked it, please press the thumbs up button. If you loved it, please consider subscribing.